Hello and welcome to Thursday. It's Thursday. Time for your This Story of His Story. It's a history lesson about diving into some mental health stuff. We're going to talk about the 5 stages of grief. I put a little question there because of how we're going to talk about them. It's something that many people are familiar with and has become the way that people understand the process of loss and grief. But there's some issues with that. So, as always, this is available to you wonderful patrons of the show who are paid Patreon members over on the Patreon. For those of you who are not, you get a couple minutes of it, just not the whole thing. If you are interested in our weekly history dives, then consider becoming a supporter of the program at patreon.com/brokenbrain. So, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. While we're on the subject, those are the 5 stages of grief. That's what people always mention. You always see it. If you're going to see a fictional depiction of any kind of grief therapy, it's going to mention those things. If you hear people talking about grief, they're going to look at what those 5 things are like. There's a great clip on The Simpsons where Homer Simpson is being told that he's going to die. It's, a classic sitcom trope from a long time ago. And turns out he doesn't die. Spoiler alert for that episode. But the joke is that the doctor informs him that he's probably going to go through the 5 stages and then list them off. And as he lists them off, Homer basically goes through all of them. He's like, you're going to go through denial. No, I'm not, because I'm not dying. You're going to go through anger. Oh, you little, that type of a thing. And then the very last thing he says, and the doctor says acceptance, says, well, I've had a good run. And he tells him, Mr. Simpson, your progress has been astounding. So this is very ingrained into our culture. But did you know that these are not the accepted actual clinical therapeutic focus that we take on grief and loss, and particularly recovery from grief and loss in modern therapy? In fact, even the creator of these the 5-stage theory, I should say, that creator, Elisabeth Kubler-Ross, did not necessarily intend for this to be a catch-all thing for grief. So let's get into that and why that is and what we actually like to talk about. The 5 stages first showed up in Elisabeth Kubler-Ross's book On Death and Dying that she released in 1969. Elisabeth Kubler-Ross was a Swiss-American psychologist who worked particularly with people who were going through the process of having a terminal diagnosis and going through the end-of-life process. And originally, these 5 stages were intended to reflect the way that she observed people going through sort of an evolution and a response, to this progression towards their own death. So this was much more specific than it has been interpreted originally when that was put forward. And once again, based off of her own observations and the things that she noticed people going through. One of the important things about this is that this was a new aspect of bringing psychological counseling to the process. Not that anybody ever got any kind of therapy or analysis or counseling for dying before that necessarily, but having that be a field of study. And as many times in a field of study, things are brought out that are like, okay, let's see if these work or whatever. So that's where you saw the introduction of these kinds of stages. Dr. Kubler-Ross was really a pioneer in this area of providing counseling to the dying. This is also, from what I've researched, pre-hospice care, that it was something that just death was obviously something that happened in the medical field. That wasn't new, but the attitude of saying, how do we actually talk about this other than just informing someone and then kind of assuming that they're going to seek comfort from family, clergy, their own philosophies, friends, whatever it is that they would go do, was sort of left on them. But to have this be an automatically included idea that there's some kind of psychological care for end-of-life process, that that was something that was fairly new at the time. So Elisabeth Kubler, as Ross was her married name. She and her husband, Emmanuel Robert Ross, combined last names to Kubler-Ross. But so she was a triplet, was born in Zurich, Switzerland. And it looks like, let's see, born in 1926. Her first experience of death was at age 5, where she had a hospital roommate who passed away. She was hospitalized for pneumonia, and she saw the death of this roommate, which struck her how peaceful that it was. And many experiences where she saw people who were dying able to calmly process, even comfort their loved ones. And that led her to start viewing death in her young life as just a part of life, that it was part of the life cycle, and that it wasn't necessarily something that people had to face with overwhelming fear, that there could be maintaining some peace, and that people did seem to get to that point of what she then would later call acceptance, which is the 5th stage of the stages of evolution of these feelings. The other thing is that even as these were implemented, there was a general thought, okay, that these were evolutionary in nature, that people go through these stages. But even at the time, from what I can understand and from what I learned coming up in the mental health field, and is that there was an understanding that not everybody goes through these to the same degree, and not everybody goes through all of them, and not everybody goes through them in that order. Now, that seems to be something to where it was evolved. However, in the common understanding, and this is important, people look at it as this is step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5. There's a general belief, and it is not clinically held by anyone that I know nowadays, but there seems to be still socially, and I think at one point clinically, there often people felt like if you skipped over, supposedly, or did not go through one of the stages, that you really were not healing, basically.